Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Crime and Punishment story. This week I am covering the tragic story of Hugh McGurk and the murder of Mary O'Connor, which took place in Sunderland in 1882. I hope you will find it interesting. Sadly, the past lives of both of those involved in this week's case was quite hard to find, so their backstories will be very basic. Sadly, a lot of recent cases have had hard to find past lives, and often it is down to the age of the story or spelling errors in the searches. Hugh McGurk was said to be around 45 years old at the time the crime was committed, so would have been born in around 1837. His place of birth and parents are unknown. Hugh had previously lived with Mary O'Connor in Sunderland. However, the couple had recently separated, but Hugh, it seems, was hoping to move back in with Mary, and Hugh worked as a labourer. Mary O'Connor, the victim, was possibly around 50 years old at the time of her death, although some articles suggest she was only around 47 years old. Her parents and place of birth are unknown. She lived in Sunderland and was described as one of the unfortunates of the town. A strange description perhaps, but if people were poor, this was often how they were described, and it was also sometimes used to describe women who worked the streets of the town, although nobody ever actually suggested that this was something that Mary did. Mary, as said earlier, had previously lived with Hugh until their separation a few days before the murder, and Mary no longer wanted to live with Hugh and had told him this clearly, saying she was better off on her own. Before we go any further, can I just say, if you do find this video interesting, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. It really is very much appreciated. And it is completely free to subscribe. It doesn't cost you any money, but it really does help to support the channel. And I would just like to add, as I always do, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. On the night of July the 3rd, 1882, Mary O'Connor went out for a drink at one of the local public houses in Sunderland. When she went inside, she saw Hugh McGurk. Although they no longer lived together, they seemed to be on friendly terms, and they sat together and had a couple of drinks. Mary then left and headed back to her home. She lived on the ground floor, and her rooms looked onto two different roads from the outside windows at the front and the back. After she'd been home for a while, Hugh suddenly arrived and let himself in, locking the door behind him and placing the key into his pocket. Mary was in the bedroom, and Hugh went in and lay down on the bed. Mary asked him to leave, telling him she did not want him there and that she would fetch a policeman if he did not go. Hugh said he did not like policemen. He then swore at Mary and told her he would murder her. He then began to attack her with a stool he had found in the room. Mary screamed out murder, and several of the neighbours heard her cries. They came to the front door but were unable to get in, so they went to the back window, where they broke away the shutter and peered inside. They saw Hugh now lying on the bed smoking his pipe, and Mary sitting on the floor with blood pouring from wounds on her face. She shouted out to him that her arm was broken. Someone went to find a policeman, and the front door was broken in. When the police asked Mary what had happened, she told them Hugh had attacked her, but he did not seem concerned at all and was easily arrested and taken to the police station, where he was charged with cutting and wounding with intent to kill. Mary was later taken to the workhouse infirmary, and her condition quickly deteriorated, and she died on July the 7th from her injuries. Hugh was now charged with her willful murder. The inquest was held at the Union Workhouse in Sunderland before Coroner Maynard. I was not able to find any details of who had identified the body of Mary O'Connor, so I can only assume that it would have been one of the neighbours who had known her for some time, as she did not appear to have any family in the area. Helen Innes said she lived next door to Mary O'Connor in Sunderland. She said she had known her for some months. She said around midnight on July the 3rd she was in bed when she was awoken by screams of murder. she recognised Mary's voice. She said she lay still for a few minutes and heard thuds coming from Mary's rooms. Helen said she then heard Mary cry out, "Oh dear me, you'll murder me." Then she cried out murder again. Helen said she got up and went to Mary's door, but she could not get in. She could still hear Mary shouting murder, and she heard a man's voice say, "I will murder you." Helen said she went round the back window and pulled off the shutter. She struck a match and looked inside. The room was in darkness, but by the light of the match she could see Mary sitting near to the fireplace. Mary called out to her, saying, "Oh, Helen, he has broken my arm," and pointed towards the bed. Helen said she struck another match and could now see Hugh lying on the bed. He spoke to her, and she said, "What do you want here?" She said she replied and told him, "Do you think I'm going to let you murder the woman?" She said he swore at her and told her, "I will do the same to you if you come in here. I'll put a knife into you." Helen said by now several of the neighbours were at the window, and she told Hugh she was not coming in. She knew someone had gone to find a policeman. Hugh got up and came towards her, but at the same time the police officer was breaking open the door at the other side, so Hugh went back to the bed. She said she had gone inside after the policeman, and Hugh was again lying on the bed smoking his pipe. The policeman asked Mary who had done this to her, and she pointed to Hugh. Helen said the policeman then arrested Hugh and took him to the police station. The wood that Hugh had used to attack Mary was lying on the bed. It was part of a stool that had been in Mary's room. At this point, Hugh asked Helen how she had seen him from the window, and she told him she had seen him well by the light of the match. He then asked her if he had spoken to her, and she said that he had. Hugh replied saying he had never spoken to her in his life. He then asked her how she had removed the shutter when it was bolted on the inside, and she replied telling him that it had not been bolted at all. Hugh then said he had nothing more to ask. Everything Helen had said had all been lies. Grace Hawkes said she also lived in Sunderland, a couple of doors down from where Mary lived. She said she had known Mary for several years and had seen her in Coronation Street with Hugh. She had heard Mary say to Hugh, "I do not want your company. I can do better without you." She did not hear Hugh's reply. On the night of the crime, she said she had heard Mary crying out murder, and she went outside and followed Helen Innes to the back window. She also looked inside when Helen struck the match. She said Mary was bleeding badly and Hugh was lying on the bed. He did not seem to be bothered about Mary. Grace said when the police arrived she had also gone inside. However, she said she could not stay as it was such an awful sight, so she had left again quickly. She said Mary's face had been covered in blood. You could hardly see it at all. She had told Mary that Hugh would murder her, and she said Mary replied saying, "Oh dear, I'm murdered now." Grace said she had seen Hugh being taken away by the policeman a short time later. Hugh said he had no questions to ask Grace as he did not know who this woman was. He had never seen her before. P.C. Nelson said he had been on duty in Coronation Street when a woman had come up to him and asked him to go to Mary's home. He said when he arrived he had also looked in from the window. He saw Mary sitting on the floor. She was covered in blood. He said he went to the front and broke open the door. Mary was now standing in the middle of the room and Hugh was still lying on the bed. He asked Mary, "Who has done this to you?" She said, "There he is on the bed." He said he turned to Hugh and said, "What do you mean by badly using the woman like that?" He said Hugh used a filthy expression but did not say anything else. He asked Mary what he had used to attack her, and she said she told him it was a piece of wood from the stool. Hugh was then taken to the police station, and P.C. Nelson said when he charged him with cutting and wounding, Hugh simply swore again but did not say anything else. P.C. Nelson said Mary had also been taken to the police station so that the police surgeon could treat her wounds, and he had sent for Dr. Francis, who had examined her and dressed all of the wounds. The following morning he had taken her to the Sunderland infirmary. He said a doctor stitched the wound on her nose but did not admit her as he said the hospital was full. He said he later took Mary to the workhouse infirmary where she had been kept in. P.C. Nelson said Hugh had been drunk when he was arrested and had been kept at the police station. However, he had later been taken to prison. Hugh, he said, had asked him what he would get for it, meaning the attack. He said he told him he did not know, but Hugh did not believe him and then asked if he thought he would get 7 days in prison for it. He said he saw Hugh in the cells a few days later to tell him that Mary had died. He did not seem bothered and simply said, "Has she?" He said he then charged him with Mary's willful murder. He did not reply, but seemed to drop his head down a little. Dr. Crosby said he was the surgeon at Sunderland Workhouse. He had been present when Mary was brought in. He said she was almost unconscious at the time. He said during the time she spent in the workhouse hospital, her wounds had been dressed. However, there was little that could be done for her, and she had died the following Sunday. Dr. Crosby said he had also been present at the post-mortem. However, he had not assisted. He believed the cause of death was compression of the brain. Mary also had 4 broken ribs, which had caused inflammation of the lungs, which would have been enough to cause death even without the brain injury. Dr. Beattie said he had performed the post-mortem on the body of Mary O'Connor. He said he completely agreed with Dr. Crosby as to the cause of death. No further evidence was given, and the coroner spoke to the jury, telling them that it was for them to decide if they thought any other verdict than one of willful murder could be returned. He said the murder had been most brutal, and he could not see any way to reduce the crime to one of manslaughter. The jury, who did not retire, immediately returned a verdict of guilty of willful murder, and Hugh McGurk was committed for trial. I did not find any evidence of a funeral for Mary O'Connor. However, if I am honest, I did not expect to find one, as it sounds as if Mary had no family in the area and was also not a woman of means. So it is most likely that this would have sadly been a pauper's funeral. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for Mary anywhere in the area. The trial took place at Durham at the end of July before Mr. Justice Matthew. When Hugh was asked how he pleaded, he had at first stated, "Guilty, but I did not mean to do it." The judge told him that was not a guilty plea. He then asked if he was being represented, to which Hugh had stated no. The judge then appointed a solicitor to take care of his needs, and the plea was changed to one of not guilty. As is often the case, the evidence given at the trial is almost exactly the same as that given at the inquest, so I will only include any new information, which in this case was little to nothing. Dr. Crosby stated that the stool which had been shown to the jury had been broken into pieces. This, he said, showed the force used by Hugh when he had attacked Mary with it on the night of the murder. Hugh McGurk did not give any evidence on his own behalf. The prosecution, in summing up, stated that this was a very clear case. It was a deliberate murder. There had been no argument between the couple, and Mary had not provoked Hugh in any way. Hugh had locked the door when he entered the rooms to prevent Mary from escaping when he attacked her. He stated quite clearly that he did not believe there was any way for this case to be reduced from one of murder to one of manslaughter. The defence, in summing up, stated that Hugh had not intended to murder Mary. He had simply intended to ill-use her. He said the prosecution had tried to suggest that Hugh had locked the door of the rooms so that he could commit the crime. However, he suggested that he had locked the door simply because he planned to sleep there, and most doors were locked at night when people went to bed. He said the jury simply had to decide if they felt Hugh had attacked Mary with a murderous intention, and the fact that he had asked if he might be sent to prison for 7 days for what he had done showed clearly to him that he had not intended to murder Mary. The judge, in summing up, said it was for the jury to decide if they felt this was a case in the category of murder or manslaughter. He stated that there had been no marks on the prisoner, the couple had not argued, there was no provocation, and yet Hugh had attacked Mary, hitting her over and over again with the wooden stool until it broke. He must have been aware of the damage he would cause doing this. However, he said if the jury believed that he had attacked in a drunken frenzy and was not aware of the damage he was causing, then this could be reduced to manslaughter. The jury retired for 30 minutes before returning a verdict of guilty of manslaughter against Hugh McGurk. The judge then spoke to Hugh, telling him that the jury had given him the benefit of the doubt. They had been merciful. However, his sentence must be a harsh one, adding that cases like this one and their cause, drunkenness, were much too prevalent. He then sentenced Hugh to 20 years penal servitude. I was not able to find any further details for Hugh McGurk after this date, so I don't know what prison he was sent to or when he was finally released. But let's hope that he had learned his lesson, kept away from the drink, and never found himself in court again after this lucky escape. And I just wanted to add in at the end of this story that Dr. Crosby, who had given evidence at the inquest and the trial, was found dead just a few days later. It seems he had taken an overdose of morphine. He had apparently been in the habit of using morphine each night, it seems, to help him sleep. No post-mortem was held, as it was felt the self-medicating doctor had simply taken too much morphine and had accidentally caused his own death. However, it seems he had also recently resigned from his job, so maybe there was something more to this story too. This was undoubtedly a very sad case. It seems that Mary did not want to live with Hugh anymore, but still seemed to be on friendly terms with him, and this seems to have led to him to believe that she would take him back, and her refusal to allow him to move back into her home looks to be the main reason why Hugh attacked her. But that surely does not seem to be reason enough for him to have behaved the way he did. And the defence really baffled me. I cannot believe he seemed to be justifying Hugh attacking Mary as long as he didn't actually intend to kill her. I have never heard a defence like that in all of the previous stories I have covered. It really was quite bizarre. I think I could have accepted him suggesting that he attacked her because he was drunk and not thinking straight, but saying what he did just made me think how strange times must have been if abusing a woman was seen as being okay, if it didn't result in death. I do not believe that Mary provoked Hugh into attacking her. She simply did not want to live with him anymore and wanted him to leave her home. However, I do think that drinking with him and spending time with him before the attack was not a good idea. I think that made him believe things had gone back to the way they had been before, and he was not able to deal with the rejection. Were the jury right to find Hugh guilty of manslaughter and not murder? Well, to be honest, I don't think they were. He was heard to say he would murder her, so I believe he knew what he was doing and did not deserve the jury giving him the benefit of the doubt. Was the judge right to sentence him to 20 years in prison? Well, on this one, yes, I think he was. I am not 100% certain that the judge felt it was a case of manslaughter, and I believe that's why he gave such a long sentence. However, it was still on the lenient side, as I do believe that he did have the option to send Hugh to prison for life. But what do you think? Do you think Hugh intended to murder Mary because she had rejected him and he simply lost his temper and did not know when to stop? Or do you think he was too drunk to know what he was doing and did not know the damage he had caused with his brutal attack? Do you think the jury were correct to find him guilty of manslaughter, or should it have been guilty of murder? And was 20 years in prison long enough or not long enough? And finally, what do you think of the strange defence with regard to abusing women? Do please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this very sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again next week.